So today I'm going to be talking about some of the basics of music theory. On screen you can see some timestamps to different parts I'm going to talk about during the video, so feel free to skip around depending on what you need to know. These will also be in the description in case you get lost. So without further ado, let's get right in with clefs. So these are the two main clefs you'll see. On the top there's a treble clef and on the bottom the bass clef. Each gap and line is a different note. So if you started on, say, the note F, which is the bottom gap on the treble clef, if you go up to the next line above that, you'll be at the note G, and if you go one below F, you'll be at the note E. This same rule applies no matter what note you start on, so one line or gap up is always the next note name up, and one line or gap down is always the next note name down. There are also some notes above and below each stave. To show these notes we use ledger lines. This allows us to go into the extended ranges of these clefs instead of having to add more. Notes are arranged in different orders based on which clef you're in. So if you're in treble clef, the gaps from the bottom go F, A, C, E, and in the bass clef it goes A, C, E, G. This is the good thing to remember so that you can find any note on either of the clefs using these as a reference. All you have to do is count the gaps and lines up or down to reach your desired note. Now, moving on to scales. On screen you can see C major scale, which starting on C goes C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then back around to C. Bear in mind that in music we start the alphabet at A and then end it at G and then restart back at A again. The important thing to note here is the different intervals between each note. This is easier to see if you look at a keyboard. So from here we can count every white and black note to get to the next letter. If the next letter is only one note away, then we call this a semitone. In the scale of C major, this occurs between the notes E and F and B and C. Every other note in the scale has a distance of 2 semitones, otherwise known as a tone. This pattern of tones and semitones is what gives the major scale its sound, and this applies to every major scale, not just to C major. For example, this is a scale of A major. Notice that all of the intervals are the same as C major, because it's still a major scale. The only thing that's changed is the pitches, and we've added these sharp symbols so that the scale follows the same pattern that appears in all major scales. The sharps and flats, or accidentals, that are found in the scales are defined by the key that the scale comes from, which brings us to the next topic of keys. So on screen you can see 5 different keys. Going from left to right, it starts with C major, then D major, then E major, then F major, and finally with D flat major. Now although this might look confusing, keys are actually quite simple. The only thing that these change is the way that the musician plays the instrument. So if the note that they're given has a sharp sign next to it, they have to raise it by 1 semitone, and if the note they're given has a flat next to it, they have to lower it by a semitone. The only difference is that instead of putting a sharp and flat next to every single note that you want sharpened and flattened, instead we use key signatures which show the performer which notes need to be sharpened and flattened. Every key has its own unique sound. This is due to the different sets of notes that are used between them. In order to reach new keys, we use something called the circle of fifths. This graph shows how the circle of fifths works. So in order to reach the next key with another sharp in the sequence, you go up a fifth. In order to reach the next key with the next flat in the sequence, you go down a fifth. For example, if you were starting on C, in order to get one sharp, you would have to go up a fifth. So you would count from C, C, D, E, F, up to G, which is the fifth, which has one sharp in it. All you have to do to find the next sharp key is do the exact same but starting on G instead. Now the only difference is for flats is that you have to go backwards a fifth instead. So say you were starting on C, you would count backwards from C, so C, B, A, G to F, which is a fifth down from C, which would have one flat. You can also go up a fourth instead of down a fifth to find flat keys, since you'll always come to the same note. Now you might have noticed that in flat and sharp keys, all that we do is add more accidentals, or sharps and flats. All the ones that have been there previously stay there. There's a specific order for sharps and flats. I like to use an acronym to help me remember this. The acronym is Father Charles Goes Down and Ends Battle, for the order of sharps. And then all you have to do to find the order of flats is reverse it. So battle ends and down goes Charles's father. Now if this order seems familiar, it's because it's on the circle of fifths. It's simply just a circle of fifths starting on F for the order of sharps, and the circle of fifths going backwards starting on B for the order of flats. But if you're just starting learning, I find it a lot easier just to use acronyms instead of learning all the theory behind stuff like this, because you're going to need to know this, but learning the theory behind it can be very counterproductive, since the end goal here is just be able to see the sharps and flats and know which key you're in, and know which notes need to be sharpened and flattened. There is also another accidental called a natural, which returns any flattened or sharpened note back to its natural state. Composers use this to add melodic and harmonic diversity to their piece, allowing performers to play outside the key without changing keys completely. Accidentals can also be used inside a key for modal songwriting, which I'll have a future video on. Now, moving on to chords. So these are all of the basic triads of C major. We have C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, B diminished, and back round to C major. This sequence of major and minor and diminished chords is the same for all major keys. Roman numerals are also frequently used to display the chord and its quality, as seen here. If the Roman numeral is uppercase, then the chord is major. If it's lowercase, then the chord is minor. And if it's lowercase with a circle next to it, it's diminished. There is also an augmented chord which doesn't appear naturally in the major scale, but appears frequently in all types of music. This is shown with an uppercase Roman numeral with a plus sign next to it. In order to understand what makes chords major, minor, diminished and augmented, we need to understand how chords are built. The notes in a C major chord are C, E and G. The relationship between these notes is what gives the chord its quality, such as major, minor, etc. To build a major triad you need 3 notes. You need the first note, or the root, then you need the third, in this case the major third because it's a major triad, and a perfect fifth. To build any triad you need the first, third and fifth. The only thing that changes the quality of them is the quality of the third and fifth. One way to determine whether the third is major or minor is to count the semitones between the first and the third. In the case of C, there is C sharp, D, D sharp, and then E, which is 4 semitones. If it was 3 semitones, it would be a minor third, but because there's 4, it's a major third. Then to determine whether it's a perfect fifth or not, you count semitones from the first again up to the fifth, and if you count in C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, which is 7 semitones. If you count at 6 semitones, that will be a diminished fifth or a flattened fifth. Then if you count up 8 semitones, that's an augmented fifth or a sharpened fifth. In the case of a minor chord such as D minor, the distance between the first and the third will be a minor third because there's only 3 semitones. But the distance between the first and the fifth is still a perfect fifth, so 7 semitones. And in a diminished chord such as B diminished, there will be 3 semitones between the first and the third, which is a minor third interval. And then between the first and the fifth there will be 6 semitones, which is a diminished or flattened fifth interval. So a diminished chord is the root with a minor third and a diminished fifth on top of it. Another way of thinking about it is 2 minor thirds stacked on top of each other, because the distance between the first and the third is a minor third, and then the distance between the third and the fifth is also a minor third. Now for an augmented chord, the distance between the first and the third is a major third, so 4 semitones, and then the distance between the first and the fifth is 8 semitones, so an augmented or sharpened fifth. Similarly to a diminished chord, you can think about an augmented chord as just 2 major thirds stacked on top of each other. If you look at the chords in the key of C major, you will see that they follow the pattern major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. This is the same for all major keys, so the 7th chord in a major key is always diminished, and the 1st, 4th and 5th are always major, and the 2nd, 3rd and 6th are always minor. The same rule applies no matter which major key you're in. So for example, if I'm in F major, the major chords will be F major, which is the 1st chord, B flat major, which is the 4th chord, and C major, which is the 5th chord. The minor chords will be G minor, which is the 2nd chord, A minor, which is the 3rd chord, and D minor, which is the 6th chord, and then the 7th chord will be E diminished. Chords can also be inverted to give them a different sound. This is done by taking the bottom note of the chord and moving it up an octave. This changes the bass note of the chord and gives the entire chord a different sound. Major triads only have 2 inversions because after you move the bottom note up an octave twice, you just get back round to the same chord that you had to start with, except up an octave. We can also stick with Roman numerals to display chord inversions by adding a B or a C to determine whether it's a first or second inversion. This tells the performer which note to put in the base of the chord so that it sounds inverted. If there isn't a B or C to show which inversion to play the chord in, then it's in root position, which means that the root note of the chord is in the bass. We can also use slash chords to show inversions. So on the left hand side of the slash it shows which chord to play, and then on the right hand side of the slash it shows which note to put it over. As you add more notes to a chord, you can get more inversions out of it because there are more notes to move to the top. So in a 7th chord, which has the root, the 3rd, the 5th and the 7th, you can have 3 inversions because you can move each note to the top 3 times before you get round to the same chord an octave up. This is a good point to start talking about 7th chords. So a 7th chord is simply a normal triad with another note on top of it, a third above the 5th, which would make it a 7th in relation to the root. And just like how normal triads are built on thirds, so are 7th chords. But now we have 3 thirds stacked on top of each other. Now instead of having a mixture of major and minor thirds twice, we have a mixture of major and minor thirds 3 times, so there are a few more possibilities of 7th chords as opposed to normal triads. On screen are all of the 7th chords you'll find in a major key. A major 7th chord is a normal major triad, but with another major third interval between the 5th and the 7th. This means that the distance between the 7th and the next root of the chord is only 1 semitone up. In a major key, there are major 7th chords on the 1st and 4th degrees of the scale. A minor 7th chord is a minor triad with a minor third interval between the 5th and the 7th. This means that unlike the major 7th chord, the distance between the 7th and the next root is 2 semitones. There are minor 7th chords on the 2nd, 3rd and 6th degrees of the scale in a major key. Now if you remember, the 5th degree of the scale in a major key is a major chord, but it's not a major 7th chord. This is because between the 5th and the 7th there's a minor third interval, even though we've got a major triad. This makes a dominant 7th chord, which is indicated by the chord with a 7 next to it, without any major or minor markings. This only occurs on the 5th scale degree in a major key. There is also one other 7th chord in a major key, which is the half diminished chord, or minor 7 flat 5. Although in a major scale the 7th chord is diminished, when we add a 7th it's not a diminished 7th, because it's actually a minor 7th distance from the root, or counting from the 7th 2 semitones below the root. Now in an actual diminished 7th chord, the distance between the 7th and the root is actually 3 semitones, if you go up starting at the 7th. This chord doesn't appear naturally in a major scale. There are also 2 other 7th chords which you don't find naturally in the major scale. These are the augmented 7th chord and the minor major 7th chord. The augmented 7th chord is characterised by an augmented chord with a minor 7th interval between the root and the 7th. The minor major 7th chord is characterised by a minor chord with a major 7th interval between the root and the 7th. This chord is almost the opposite of a dominant 7th chord because it is based on a minor triad with a major 7th interval, as opposed to the dominant 7th's major chord with a minor 7th interval. Now that we've covered all the 7th chords, let's move on to chord sequences. A lot of questions that pop up in music theory tests follow the same format as this. You are given a chord sequence and you have to try and figure out what key you're in and what the chord's functions are. Now going over what we've already learned, I'm going to walk you through how to figure out what key you're in when only given a chord sequence. So here are some key points to remember. The 1st, 4th and 5th chords in any major key are always major. The 2nd, 3rd and 6th chords are always minor, and the 7th chord is always diminished. In this example we were given a 7th chord, which is a dominant 7th. Now if you remember back to when we were talking about 7th chords, the 5th chord in a major key is the only chord that has a dominant 7th. We can also see that there is a B flat chord, which means that the key that we're in has at least one flat, since B flat is the first flat that you add when you go into flat keys. That's the battle, in battle ends and down goes Charles's father. So the first thing I would do when given this is write in the chords onto the stave. From this we can see that we have a B flat in the root of the B flat chord, a B flat in the 5th of the E diminished chord, a B flat in the 3rd of the G minor chord, and a B flat in the 7th of the C7 chord. So now we can write in that we have one flat in the key signature. Now remembering the circle of fifths, if we start on C and count backwards to get into the flat keys, since we only need one flat, we count backwards from C, so C, B, A, G to F. So that means that we are in F major. Now, just to be sure, I would write out a scale of F major and write all the chords that are in F major onto it. And sure enough, all of the chords in the example match up to F major. A quicker way to do this would be to look if there was a diminished chord in the example. If there is, you can simply go up one note in the scale, because you know that the 7th chord in a major scale is a diminished chord. And since it's only one semitone away from the root, all you have to do is go up one. You can do a similar thing if you see a dominant 7th chord, because you know that the 5th chord in a major key is always a dominant 7th chord. So then all you have to do is go down a 5th from the dominant 7th chord, and then you'll find the key. So that's it, we're done for now. Well done if you made it this far. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments and I'll try to answer them all. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel to see more videos like this. Also, please consider subscribing to my Patreon so that I can make more of these types of videos. You'll also gain access to Patreon exclusive content such as videos and polls, a personal thank you at the end of all of my videos, behind the scenes and sneak peeks to future videos, and much, much more. I'll be making dedicated videos to all of the topics I've talked about in this video, so please show your support if you want to see those videos. Links for everything will be in the description. Thanks for watching.